Repair under these circumstances really isn't possible, because you either have to cop to something that isn't true, which is terrible for your soul, or then they're going to turn around and say, I guess you weren't who we thought you were. But who cares what they thought you were, because it's all distorted, good or bad. Incompetence is bad enough when it gets weaponized, right? So you have encountered this, even if you haven't actually used this term. Weaponized incompetence is the partner who says, I don't know how the new dryer works, so I didn't want to break it when I put the clothes in. So now you have to do it. It's the coworker who says, I don't have the password for that system, so I couldn't enter those files. So now you have to do it. It's the family member who says, I don't have their flight information. Nobody ever tells me anything, so I don't know when to pick them up. So now you're the one rushing out to get them. So you kind of get the idea, right? It's often this incapacity or lack of capability that a person falls back onto so they don't have to do something. And then someone's got to do the thing, right? So you may be the one having to take on the onus of the thing that they cannot do. The whole weaponized incompetence thing has a passive-aggressive vibe, a sort of vulnerable, narcissistic thing happening. The weaponized incompetence is where the sullen, petulant victim stuff meets entitlement, meets not taking responsibility. The kind of, I can't do it, so you do it, and it's not my fault I can't do it. So then the assumption is someone's got to do it, and often it's you. Now you may wonder what non-weaponized incompetence looks like. Well, it looks like incompetence, just plain incompetence, right? It looks like the person like, oh, I don't know how to work the dryer. Let me figure out the dryer. Could you show me how the new dryer works? Because I don't know. Or they just don't do it right and the clothes don't get dry, right? Or can I have the password so I can get those entered? Or maybe they just enter the password wrong so many times that the password locks. Weaponized incompetence is an entitled incompetence. One thing we do know about vulnerable narcissism is that many vulnerable narcissistic folks have sort of a failure to launch. They maintain fantasies about all the great things that they're going to do or be or how smart they are, but they lack the initiative to do it. They almost wait, again, there's that entitlement, for things to come to them. So why would they take initiative? And when that lack of initiated can be further substantiated by them actually not knowing something, then they run with it. Now, weaponized incompetence people are the worst people to hire for a job. You may make the mistake of thinking, well, they seem smart. But the fact is, in real life and in work life, hustle and grit are actually a bit more important than just raw intellect. I have met a lot of really, really smart, vulnerable narcissists, like really smart. But they just didn't get stuff done. They talked about getting stuff done, but they didn't do the things, right? And they're smart, and you might find yourself giving them chance after chance after chance. But because weaponized incompetence people are often quite toxic, certainly entitled, if you keep them around long enough in the workplace, don't be surprised if they lawyer up, if you try to fire them on grounds of their incompetence. So when you notice the incompetent stuff, especially the weaponized incompetent stuff, watch for it early on and do not give second chances. So another example of where you might see weaponized incompetence show up is, for example, in a relationship. And you see this a lot with people who are going to have a child together. And, in the whole fantasy of a child, having a child with someone else, the other partner, the incompetent partner, might say, I'm going to help and I'm going to do the diapers and I'm going to wake up in the night with them and I'm going to do the this and the that. Then the time comes and they do the things badly. So the diaper is on in this half-assed way and they're actually trying to use Scotch tape to put it on. The child's bath is a mess. The way they try to feed the kid creates a bigger mess and the child doesn't, they put the clothes on backwards, whatever it may be. And so what ends up happening is that they make the big promise, they don't deliver on the thing. And not only do they not deliver, they do it so badly and you have no option but to do it right. So then you have to step in, and now you're stuck because the kid exists. So you've got it, and now you find in very, very short period of time, you're going to find that you are doing the lion's share of stuff with the child for no other reason that a child is such high stakes, that you want it done right, and this person is shown that they're completely incompetent at it. Now they're off the hook, and don't be surprised when they turn around and said, well, you do everything. It's not like you ever let me do anything with the kid. So they get that passive aggressive dig. They get that passive aggressive dig in there. Now, narcissistic folks can also be a little bit lawyerly and procedural in how they live their lives. They may hit you with the, you didn't ask me to do that, as though they are some sort of computer or robot that has to be programmed. They often lack imagination in that way, especially if they don't really want to do the thing that needs to be done. And they almost enjoy the argument and finding the loophole. And they certainly don't feel the need to show that hustle and grit. Again, hustle and grit are typically something we witness in people who are not entitled. Now listen, some grandiose narcissistic folks can pull off hustle for just long enough to impress someone in a work setting that they admire, but forget about it with the vulnerable narcissistic folks. Hustle and grit are never really going to be their strong suit. Now, this weaponized incompetence, when it runs into an empathic person, can result in you making excuses, and it has a sort of gaslighting feel. You may think things like, oh, I guess I didn't show them how to run the new dryer, or they're right, I didn't give them the password. And then you can fall into their whole sort of irresponsible schema. Instead of thinking, why can't this grown-ass person step the hell up and figure it out? The weaponized incompetence people are definitely not people you would want to be on a deserted island with. They would hit you things like, sorry, I don't know how to break a coconut. Nobody showed me. You're going to be breaking all the coconuts on that island. This weaponized incompetence phenomenon happens so much, and we are often tempted to write it off to lazy or annoying, but it's more than that. It is toxic. And in the workplace, it can mean that they do nothing or very little, and everyone else is left holding the bag. In a family, it may mean that a few people do the lion's share of chores and arrangements and stuff. And in a relationship, it means that you are nowhere near an equitable distribution of things like household responsibilities and chores. Don't get dazzled by the narcissistic people's big talk. Talk is worth nothing. Pay attention if people actually do the thing, whatever it is, because those people are the keepers. I have to tell you, as someone who's been a teacher and all kinds of things for a long time, hustle and grit are becoming more and more rare in a world that is more and more tinged by entitlement. So on the flip side, when you do find those gritty folks, hold on to them for dear life, because there's a lot more people out there who are capable of weaponized incompetence. Have you ever had this happen in a narcissistic relationship? You try hard to communicate with them in a way that they might hear you. You might say, hey, hon, I would love it if we could meet my sister and her husband while they're in town. We missed them the last few times they've come, and they wanted to take us to that new restaurant downtown. I know you have some stuff to do Saturday and you've had a busy week, but this wouldn't be until the evening, okay? So you do the eggshell walking and the fluffing and the context setting and all of it. And then the narcissistic partner says, oh, come on. The thought of listening to your brother-in-law yammer on about his new business, and you barely even like your sister, and you know how hard I've been working, and I know you're going to make it about me and how I don't want to see them and I'm the bad guy. But you know what? It is selfish after the week I'm having to expect me to have dinner, blah, blah, blah. You know the deal. You can fill it in. And because fully cutting the trauma bonds and getting to radical acceptance is not easy, especially if there's lots of ties that bind you in this, you are hurt and it stings. And you hate that your life is so isolated, and you even think, damn, what am I doing in this relationship? It is not good for me. Then Friday rolls around, okay?
and your narcissistic partner turns around to you and says, hey, babe, yeah, my week is settled down. It's good. Like the deal ended up working out. Let's do it. Let's get together with your sister. I know she means a lot to you, and I've been wanting to try that place. It'll be fun. Oof, right? Many people will just be happy about that. You might even think that this is the narcissistic person showing empathy, saying things like, I know she means a lot to you. You might even be elated. You might even get mad at yourself for second guessing your partner, or think you're being dramatic about even fantasizing about a life without being in this relationship, and think, see, narcissism, schmarcissism, my partner sees what matters to me. Well, the more this happens, the less happy it will make you. But for a long time, it becomes the rhythm of the relationship. The narcissistic people kind of come out with disappointment or just straight up shock and awe, showing you who's boss. And then once they establish that hierarchy yet another time, and you once again adjust to the disappointment, they'll pull back and say, okay, I'm so nice. You can have your way on this. As though they are doing you a favor when you are actually saying, hey, some decent people want to take you out to dinner and I care about them. But this example, this particular back and forth, which can just be about everyday stuff. I've talked about this idea of the perpetrator-rescuer dynamic. You may not think that, well, those words, perpetrator, that feels so severe. But this stuff wears you down. You get accustomed to the cycles of disappointment and redemption. And it's not just disappointment. Sometimes the thing that they're saying, we can't do this, or I am going to do this, or I'm canceling this, will throw you into a panic. And you start wasting resources to solve the problem and the issue that is being raised. Just to have them say that, oh, that's no longer a thing. So you pop in and out of panic all the time in one of these relationships too, which is definitely not good for your health. This is a very, very difficult way to co-parent with someone because while you as an adult may be able to ride the wave of disappointment and after enough time may realize that they will always come around, but you have to white knuckle everything in your life and keep people on ice or plans on ice until the last minute. This is hard enough for an adult. But for a child who is always having to wonder until the last minute if things will work out, it is an unsafe, perilous, and uncomfortable experience. And it can be hard as the other parent to navigate your children through it and not end up trying to almost normalize it. Now, narcissistic parents will do this to their kids. And if you had a narcissistic parent, you know exactly what I mean. The parent may say no or give you the cold shoulder or the silent treatment and then come around. And a kid doesn't have the same capacities as an adult, and they also have many more vulnerabilities. So the child may feel so grateful that their parent agreed or did the thing at the last minute. And this can really firm up that trauma bond for kids. In fact, this parent that keeps them hanging and then comes through can often feel more heroic than the parent who predictably follows through and doesn't use this tactic with them, which can be heartbreaking if you're the consistently protective parent. I've shared the analogy that author Rebecca Humphreys has talked about so many times, the narcissistic relationship as someone who you meet and then the sensation of getting to know them it's like being whisked to the top of a 100-story building. And it's exciting and the view is beautiful. And just as you're settling into their arms, they push you off. And in the terror of falling, you finally see what this really was until they catch you just as you're about to hit the ground. Your seducer becomes your perpetrator, becomes your rescuer. And that means you are attached to a very dangerous, confusing, slippery creature. And you find yourself not only forever vigilant, but also self-blaming. Now, the dynamic this video about is different. It is about you voicing a need or a want or an idea, having it shut down, being shamed about it, You may be feeling guilty, being made to feel guilty or angry, or even thinking, this relationship is not good, or this person is not cool, this isn't safe. And then that person does an about face and says, "Oh, actually, I will do this for you." So they get to portray themselves as a kind, accommodating person. And for most of us, right, we just want the thing we wanted to work out. And we're also invested in retaining the attachment and all that cognitive dissonance stuff, and sort of not feeling that tense state all the time. Well, most folks don't point out that pattern of like, well, why were you so terrible to me when I brought it up in the first place? We don't bring that up. We're just glad it worked out. Now, narcissistic relationships are not about communication or sharing or growing. They are about tactics and survival. So, every decision by you has to be calculated. And this happens after radical acceptance, where you are actually informed by what this personality is. And before you get it, you may just be learning to hold back more and more and blaming yourself. Narcissistic relationships are about waiting for the good moments, right? So when they come, because the narcissistic person sort of imperiously agrees to what you want and then makes it about them being such a nice, accommodating person, you're probably not going to question the dynamic or how mean they were when they originally said no. You just grabbed the win to maybe just get something that you needed. Narcissistic relationships work because we push down the abuses and hold on to the normal feelings moments. And we try to just pretend that those normal feelings moments are most of the moments. Now, this can be even worse when it is not about getting something, but about not losing something. So here's an example of that. The narcissistic person tells you that no, you guys, we won't be taking the vacation you had planned for months, or maybe they'll say to you like, "No, the kids can't do the after school program. I don't want to spend that kind of money." Or, "Yeah, you know what? We're going to end up moving. Yeah, we're going to move out of this town. No, I know you made all these relationships here, but nah, this other place will work out better." Or the narcissistic boss says that you will not be getting the extra support that was going to be needed to finish up a project. So you're being told that something you were expecting or that you already had will be taken away from you without much explanation. You aren't asking for anything. It's something you had and boom. Now, most people, when this happens to us, will have a reaction. Protest, sadness, anger, and that will be shut down. The usual BS of being told you're being selfish, don't you understand? You should understand why this is. And again, you may question this relationship as a result. You may even wonder if you're the one who's selfish, that whole cascade. But then after you have sat in the grief and the loss, they turn around and say, "You know what? It's okay. We'll take the trip." Or, "I figured out how to move around the money to make the after school program work." Or, "You know what? Fine. We don't have to move." Or, "Hey everyone, I took the time this weekend to figure out how you can get that support to finish the project. Am I the guy or am I the guy?" Once they tell you the lost thing isn't actually lost, the narcissistic person will expect validation and thanks and being told, "You're so great, thank you so much." Well, the tension in you is whether this is your hero or that this whole tension didn't need to happen in the first place. You may have already told the children that were going to be affected, for example, that things aren't happening, and already had to wipe away their tears and manage their disappointment, or those of your colleagues. You may have girded yourself for the disappointment. And so when the good news comes, the relief that comes over you will look and feel like approval and praise, showing thanks and gratitude, rather than seeing this as the toxic pattern it is. This roller coaster of disappointment, and then feeling as though the narcissistic person is making everything all right and is your hero, over time takes a tremendous toll on you. This isn't about a one-time disappointment that turns around, folks. Do not generalize this from one event. This isn't a game. This is an ongoing, repeated pattern that chronically positions the narcissistic person who actually was manipulating the game to end up as the hero and savior. But you have to look at both sides of the story. The abusive or invalidating or manipulative piece. You may be glad the outcome ended up okay, but the ride was unnecessary and the wear and tear on you is real. And if you can't or don't want to leave the relationship, at least you can see it realistically. Lift the self-blame and recognize it as not being a healthy pattern, creating plan Bs, not communicating the losses to others too early, and not celebrating the wins because they aren't. They are artificial drama created by the narcissistic person to keep holding their position of power and keep posturing as a hero and show you who's boss. Allows them to stay as the savior and the dominator. You can't call them out on their game, but you can see it for what it is. And hold back on any of those big shows of gratitude. At a minimum, it'll help you feel more whole inside. This cycle that I'm talking about may not be the big traumatizing cycles of violence we often see, and that often show up in a similar way in relationships. But these small sort of thefts that accumulate over time, these smaller cuts, can do just as much harm over time, with the added burden that it is often very difficult for people in these situations to get support. Because the people looking at you will say, well, you ended up getting what you wanted, so what are you complaining about? But having to live in that back and forth universe of living in a life where disappointment is always being dangled, it is a very difficult way to live.
I mean, gaslighting's so confusing by definition, right? But this is an interesting one. Just talking with someone about this recently. So let me lay this out as a scenario, okay? You are in a narcissistic relationship. For this scenario, let's sort of think of it as more of a vulnerable, covert type of narcissistic relationship. And in the beginning, whatever anemic love bombing comes and goes, you start settling into a rhythm. Over time, devaluing, more eggshell walking, tiptoeing, appeasing, self-doubting, self-blaming, but enough good days to keep you in the game. Then one day, your partner, narcissistic partner, says to you, hey, your friend Mary, I don't know, there's something weird there. Remember how the other night at dinner when people were talking about your new job, she didn't even say anything. Your partner may even double down another time. Why doesn't your friend Mary ever respond to you? Like, what's up with her? I don't know if I trust her. So you listen to your partner. You listen to them a lot more because you probably spend more time with them than anyone. Maybe they're right. Maybe Mary was quiet at the dinner. Or maybe she didn't respond. This new narcissistic relationship may be taking up so much of your time anyhow that you aren't spending as much time with your friend Mary. But your partner, who does have more contact with you, plants a seed of doubt. You have enough damn problems now dealing with this slowly indoctrinating and encroaching narcissistic person, as well as all the other stuff in your life. So, maybe you don't stay in as much touch with Mary. Maybe he was right, and she is a little weird. And then you look up, and the months have passed, and you and Mary are out of touch. Maybe she tried to reach you a few times, and you never got back to her. Then time goes on and you get into an argument with the narcissistic person. You might talk about feeling isolated or that you don't see your friends anymore. And your partner says, that's not my fault. That's your problem if you don't get in touch with your friends. And you may say, but you told me not to get in touch with Mary. And they say, no, I didn't. And you think, here they go gaslighting me. And your partner then says, I told you Mary was weird. I guess you do too if you ghosted her. Then the confusion hits you like a tidal wave. Wait, that's right. They never did tell me not to call Mary. I didn't call Mary. Is Mary weird? Wait, what? Now you're really confused. Isolation is a key element of all toxic relationships. It makes gaslighting more potent if there are no dissenting voices to the narcissistic gaslighters. Now, the malignant narcissistic folks, they go in fast. They just isolate you, right? They put trackers on you. They cut you off from the world. That's the kind of isolation we see in dynamics such as coercive control. However, in other forms of narcissistic relationships, it's a more insidious form of isolation. Often in those relationships, they don't just tell us to not call our friends or family. They just aren't supportive of those relationships. They make digs, comments, may even make us suspicious of these folks. Remember, you're already doubting yourself because of the narcissistic relationship. But you also may not get it, and you may want the relationship to work. So they may play on a plausible seed. For example, you may have been competitive with a sister, but it was healthy competition. And the narcissistic person may take that seed of competition and play upon that dynamic. So they don't directly say, don't call your sister, don't spend time with your friends. But there's a sort of disapproval hanging in the air. As though if you did spend time with these folks, you know you'd be criticized or questioned. Things like, why are you choosing to spend time with someone who's weird? What's wrong with you? Or what is up with you? Like, is it so important? Your sister's always so competitive with you. Like, what's that about? And you may have even initially pushed back on that narcissistic person's critiques of your friend. But if the narcissistic person is a louder and more consistent voice, and you couple that with the destabilization of the gaslighting and the manipulation, the narcissistic voice is going to win. With each day in a narcissistic relationship, self-doubt grows, and they climb into that and are better able to control and manipulate. But the trick is they don't directly tell you not to call these people. That becomes a sort of choice-ish. We often take the path of least resistance. It's the path that will lead to the least messiness in your narcissistic relationship. Like I said, it may play on a tiny seed of doubt you had about a relationship. Maybe Mary is weird. And these processes are slow. People are busy, and in some cases, when a few times pass and you don't respond to the text messages of a friend, or don't show up to a series of events or invitations, or you cancel a couple of dinners or the like, or you don't take calls or the calls are brief, it may very well be that the narcissistic person didn't ever say you couldn't see them, and then that can really double down on your self-blame. You'll say, I guess they didn't tell me to not call them. Oh, and maybe I'm also blaming them for all the other stuff too. A narcissistic relationship is one where there are no straightforward choices. Calling a friend for dinner isn't just calling a friend for dinner. It's also having to listen to criticisms of the friend, suspicions of them and your friendship, painting you out as foolish for wanting to see them. The time with the friend being designated as a waste of time. After a while, especially since these relationships wear you down so much, it may just boil down to, maybe they're right. Maybe she isn't good for me, and is it really worth it just to have dinner? And this insidious process slowly breaks you down because you do become more and more isolated. And not in a way that seems like the in-your-face isolation of coercive control, but something more gradual. So you may not even identify it as isolation. You may sort of justify it or just subsume it under becoming busier or the compromises we make in a relationship, or maybe even lend some plausibility and believability to what they're saying about these other people, especially if there was ever a spotty history with them. One day you may look up and find that your support networks have shrunk to very tiny, that your friends are experiencing stuff and you don't even know what's happening in their lives. You may even feel grief or guilt at missing difficult, even wonderful times in their lives. But through all of this, the narcissistic person in these situations can say, I guess if you want to be precise and legal about it, that they never told you to stop being in touch. They don't directly tell you. It's 1,000 tiny manipulations and behaviors you engage in that are an attempt to keep the the relationship going. A narcissistic relationship works because one person is perpetually trying to not rock the boat. Then another dynamic may also pop up, that you don't involve the friends in your life because you don't want them to have to be exposed to the narcissistic person who is seeing them so negatively, as weird or whatever. You may even be on to the narcissistic person by then, but can't get out. Or it's a family member embedded in a larger system, in a much more longer term or lifetime relationship. So just to protect the person, the friend in your life, that the narcissistic people are casting aspersions on, you don't have them around. And in those situations, we often don't say to the friend, hey, I'm not having you come around because my family is narcissistic, or my partner's narcissistic, or there are several people in my family who are narcissistic, and I don't want you to have to deal with it. My family's toxic and awful, and I don't want them to disrespect you. I, though, actually highly recommend doing it this way, because then there is a fighting chance of maintaining the relationship. It does require, however, that you see the narcissistic relationship clearly. And some people aren't there yet. Then the person you aren't inviting over, though, may get it and not personalize it and may see it as the protective action that it is. I talked with someone recently for whom this happened. Her narcissistic ex was talking about a friend who was being weird or odd, and it made her leery about calling her or having her over. She didn't even really believe him. The friend was quirky, but in a good way, and she was a support. But the person I was talking to said that at the time it was happening, she didn't know her partner was narcissistic. She just thought he was being fussy about people and didn't want to have to explain her friend's quirks. So she slowly stopped inviting her around. And as this person I was talking to, got deeper and deeper into her narcissistic relationship, she was being more and more gaslighted and getting more and more confused. When the relationship finally ended, she reached out to the quirky friend, who was hurt but ultimately understood. And the person I was chatting with said she was overtaken with grief at the amount of time she lost and recognized that she may have figured it out sooner if she had had supports like the quirky friend around her. She still blamed herself, and she said, I was never forcibly or kind of scarily stopped from seeing her. But then this lady I was talking to healed and understood how it all happened. Manipulation is often so subtle that it's impossible to spot. This issue comes up repeatedly when you even see cases argued in court on domestic abuse. You'll hear people saying, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you leave? But without understanding the dynamics of coercion, and the law has not yet caught up, it makes sense why people don't leave. And since many narcissistic relationships are not so severe that the dynamics of coercive control are in place, it's the tiny things, the bargains we make in our minds, the little hassles we don't want to deal with, the loved ones we don't want to have to repeatedly defend, the energy we don't have. They are clever enough to not say it outright, but can't see your friend, but get the same result with you in the hot seat. But this is why getting it is so important, so you can see these dynamics when they show up. And if you are stuck having the narcissistic person around, at least foster the workarounds so you can continue to be in the friendships and other relationships that not only matter to you, but that are going to be absolutely essential to your healing. This just happened to me, and it was fascinating because I knew it was happening to me in real time, but it wasn't a typical gaslight, and yet it's an interesting and profoundly manipulative move that can mess you up more than a traditional gaslighting experience, especially if you don't know what you're dealing with. Again, I can't even come up with a name for it. It's a hybrid gaslight, an inverted gaslight, a reverse gaslight. It's a manipulative mess. I'm just not sure of the name. This experience happened actually for me in a workplace relationship, but I could easily see how it could happen in any kind of narcissistic or manipulative relationship, family, partner. In my case, it was someone who was accusing me, bold-faced accusing me of things that were untrue. I knew they were untrue, right? They were omitting key facts and then painting a really distorted narrative of me as someone who is disloyal and shirking responsibilities and being obtuse and not being open and honest, okay? The events the person was talking about were untrue. These accusations were untrue. I knew they were untrue, and because of that, I was able to be more gaslight resistant. I knew the other people, it was a group of people, I knew the other players in the group, and only one of them was messaging me, and I knew this person had also been given an untrue narrative by some of them. Untrue or not, it still wasn't okay, right? I was being accused of something that was actually patently untrue, and then I was being told things like I wasn't a team player. It's gaslight in its purest form. But here is where it twisted into something else. The person who sent the message then went on to say, as the message went on, it's one of those really, really long texts, which is always a sign of, ooh, but then went on to say, like, you're so great at what you do. Your contribution's so essential. Dr. Ramani, you're so brilliant. You're so essential to the project. And everyone thinks you're amazing. Pick a lane and go to hell. And double go to hell that you and your team, who were actually trying to do a project that was meant to help survivors of abuse, would do this. It's bad enough when people behave in these ways. It is really bad when they virtue signal and then shine out their communal narcissism card of wanting to be vaunted as such great rescuers in the world, right? Remember, anger is good. Dr. R loves some anger. Surprise is not good. That showed me I'd healed a bit because I wasn't at all surprised this happened. I looked at the text, not surprised, but then I became mad as hell. Good. Now I'm just generally pissed because this person and others in this group thought they could get this inverted, reverse, call it what you will, gaslight past me. I mean, in some ways, no respect, right? In some ways, it was having no respect for the player. I have to admit, some of this anger was ego, like, how did you think you were going to get this past me? But actually, I had to step back. I was actually telling a friend about that today, and it said, it wasn't ever about me. It just, these are antagonistic people because they never for a minute would believe what they did was manipulative, right? But then I was glad they did because now look, I get to teach you guys about it. So there you go. You gotta turn the toxic lemons into lemonade. Paying it forward is an important part of healing. So thank you to those people who behaved so badly. So why am I calling this a inverted, twisted, distorted, reverse gaslight? It was a regular gaslight to start with, okay? The person denied reality, said something untrue, doubted reality, doubted experience, doubted my perception, and then told me there's something wrong with me. I mean, there's a lot wrong with me, okay? A lot. But in my particular case, disloyal, not committed, not a team player, not true, okay? Now, there's power in this message because the person who sent the message actually has a good reputation in the world at large and has a lot of power. So that built in the so-called trust that a gaslighter requires and had done a lot of work to build that trust with me. But the kind of twist, distorted, reverse part of this gaslight was that the gaslight ultimately landed in a different place. Hey, yeah, we saw these terrible things that you did and that you're doing, and you are kind of rotten and disloyal and awful, but then turning around and saying, well, you're actually really great. And a great person wouldn't do all the terrible things you did. You see what I'm saying? You're great. You did terrible things. So what does that mean? It's a skillful maneuver because it doubles down on the manipulation of reality and it treats the person being gaslighted. Again, you're saying there's something wrong with you, but hey, look, we think you're great. And yet you did terrible things. So what gives, right? I happen to know the psychology of this group of people because I've known them for a while. And I knew that this was a bit of a manipulative Hail Mary pass that they were tossing. So it sort of firmed up. It's solidified. Remember, in these relationships, everything's data. So it firmed up what I'd already suspected, right? I was already disengaging a little bit. And we always know that the moment of disengagement, once it's sensed in a narcissistic relationship, is a precarious time. The manipulations and the abuses escalate at that time. The premise being, most narcissistic people would say, look, what's wrong with you? I'm great. Why are you wanting to step away? But this kind of distorted, inverted gaslight is actually a very skillful maneuver. Because when this happens to you, you feel like you're being hit from all sides. It's like a simultaneous invasion from air, sea, and land. You are bad. You are good. You aren't seeing reality clearly. All these things are being said to you at the same time. The manipulator, the gaslighter, portrays themselves as someone who, I know you're great, so it's shocking that you could behave like this, so we need to talk about this. And why, oh why would you want to disconnect or be angry at someone who thinks that you're so great? Only a crazy person would do that, right? So you see what it does? It reinforces that sense that there's something wrong with you. I think you're great. Why wouldn't you want to keep talking to me? After this happens, you really don't have any good path forward to talk with someone who does this to you. There's no sort of repairing it and navigating it, because the entire conversation with the person has to be based on a faulty premise. You would almost have to buy into their version of reality to redeem the good view they have of you. But everything they do is a distortion. So the good view of you has to be a distortion too, right? You're so smart and great. So if you're so smart and great, you must see how badly you're behaving, which means if you don't see how badly you're behaving, then you're actually a delusional bad person who does bad things, and you're not as smart and as good as they claim that you are, right? And this kind of smiling and winking and praising you while they stab you from behind is actually a pattern that's quite common in self-righteous narcissism and communal narcissism. Those of you in these relationships, this is where you're more likely to see this. Things like, well, aren't they such wonderful people because they see the good in everyone? They even see the good in the terrible people who take advantage of them and stab them in the heart, even though that's not what you did. Repair under these circumstances really isn't possible, because you either have to cop to something that isn't true, which is terrible for your soul, or then they're going to turn around and say, I guess you weren't who we thought you were. But who cares what they thought you were, because it's all distorted, good or bad. My version happened to occur at work, right? In an intimate relationship, this could easily be they could do the whole usual gaslighting sequence and then turn around after the end of it and say, you're such an amazing mother. You take care of our family so well. How is it that someone who is as loving as you, someone I love so much, how are you not able to see the terrible things you are doing? And you're like, what? In a family, this could look like a narcissistic parent telling you things like, you've never appreciated this family. You've just thrown back in my face everything that any of us have ever tried to do for you. You don't express gratitude. I mean, you're the great hope of this family. You make all of us so proud every day. You're such a powerhouse. You're so smart. You're the beating heart of this family. I just don't know how you can't see how much damage and disrespect you've engaged in. I don't understand how you can't see how much you take advantage of this family when we all see your light. This dynamic is much more pronounced and can be much more powerful when there is a trauma bond present, because you can get whiplash from going back and forth from how bad you are to how good you are, all in one text message. And you may still feel that you want this relationship to persist or last or to work. You may blame yourself. And well, maybe you're the one who's wrong, right? Because they are seeing the good in you too, and this isn't all black and white. So maybe it's you that is seeing all of this the wrong way. A nice lady I know wrote a book that's called It's Not You. In my case, I was lucky. In this case, I was lucky. I am not trauma bonded to these people. So seeing their kind of twisty gaslight maneuver, that was easier for me. There's no major attachment disruption. If I never saw or heard from these people again, I would be fine with it. It wouldn't change my life. But the message did stick in my head because that's what manipulative stuff does, even if you don't really care about the person. It's like a heavy meal that feels really gross in your gut, and you can't wait to crap it out of you. But it's taking a minute. And so it sort of feels heavy and awful. This message stuck because it was so manipulative. And as a sort of added narcissistic cherry on top, like I said, the person who sent the message is somebody that a lot of people put on a pedestal. Again, this is what happens in these relationships, which also fuels that sense of injustice, which is the core of not only what happens to these relationships, but can impede healing. Had I not, because my full-time job is understanding these dynamics, had that not been it, the sender's power in the world and everyone adoring this person would definitely have led to a lot of self-doubt for me. On this channel, you'll know that there's all kinds of videos such as the anatomy of a narcissistic text message and tons of videos. We have courses about gaslighting. But this kind of twisty-turny gaslighting takes it to another level because the good things they are saying about you may be true. For example, you're smart or you're loving, you're a good mom, whatever. Now, these sorts of twisty-turny gaslights often go a little bit too far and they're a little heavy-handed with their praise. You're our great hope. And it feels like fluffing. But that combination of the denial of reality, the suggestion that there is something wrong with you, and them then combining it in the same messaging with how special and great you are, it's murky. It is no different than a narcissistic parent screaming at their child and saying terrible things and drawing that child perhaps into a hug and saying, "Can't you see how much I love you? I say these things because you're my everything. I hit you because I love you." And I'm going to curse because that's a mind fuck. I can't think of any other word. Because when that happens to a child, the child has to attach. And the child wants and needs to believe that you're loved by this screaming, enraged parent. And it means that very quickly you pair love and abuse and adoration and cruelty. And as all of us on this channel know, it becomes an extremely difficult cycle to break. Pain and love live too close to each other in a narcissistic relationship. I have to figure out how to sort of land this plane and finish this work and all of this with this sort of reverse gaslighting mess of a group of people. And knowing who they are puts me in a better position, both defensively and offensively. My realistic awareness is very firmed up, as are my realistic expectations. But all of this, though, was still stressful. Praise from a narcissistic person is always a poison dart. It's always a part of a larger manipulation. They don't share the stage. So discernment matters. You cannot fall for the narcissistic person's fluff. There's always an agenda. A compliment from a narcissistic person is dangerous. Because listen, people who have it so wrong about us, again, and have distorted reality so badly, we have to remember that their compliments are distorted too. There's always an agenda. It's easier to believe none of what they're saying and proceed cautiously.